Welcome to Community Chats, bringing you stories and insights from the heart of Community Living Toronto, a nonprofit organization that proudly supports people with intellectual disabilities and their families. We will focus on stories of belonging and inclusion and topics of interest from communities across Ontario and the world. From uplifting moments to breaking barriers, from innovative policies to ideas from leading thinkers, we continue to advocate for inclusive communities and support the rights and choices of people with an intellectual disability.
I'm Brad Saunders, CEO at Community Living Toronto. Welcome to our Community Chats podcast, an opportunity to share, learn, and understand from each other. These podcasts are released on the 15th and the 30th of each month, so please listen, like, and give us your feedback. These podcasts are one of the ways we want to stay connected with you, members of our community. In 2023, Community Living Toronto celebrated 75 years of supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I've had the privilege of working with an outstanding group of caring people for the last 13 years and continue to be amazed at the work we're able to do. For our 50th anniversary, we established a Patrons Council made up of influential and supportive volunteers from Toronto who provide us advice, support our work, and open the occasional door for us. Today, we're having a conversation with one of our members of our Patrons Council, David Lepofsky. David's CV is too extensive to cover in any detail, but in brief, David's a lawyer who attended Osgoode as well as Harvard. He's a renowned advocate for disability rights and was influential in having disability included in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. He was also instrumental in the establishment of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, the AODA, and he is currently the chair of the Special Education Advisory Board of the Toronto District School Board. I've known David since the mid-1990s through his work with the AODA Alliance. Last year, we joined a trip together organized by RENA to Israel to look at disability services in that country. Today, we talk about the Charter of Rights, the challenges of navigating the school system, as well as their duty to accommodate, and the importance of individual education plans. I always learn something when David and I chat, and I hope you will as well. David, welcome.
Great to be here as always, and always good to talk to you.
Why don't we, I'd love to hear a little bit about advocacy is sort of, I know you best in that space. How did you get drawn into this, or what has been your passion around doing advocacy for so many years?
Well, I was born with partial vision in one eye and no eyesight in the other eye, and over my teens, that vision got worse to the point where by my early 20s, I was totally blind. And I experienced barriers as a person with a disability early on and often. I went to law school, not to do disability rights, but frankly, because I wanted to be a lawyer. And I pursued a career, which I'm now retired from. I'm a part-time law teacher just in my retirement, but I pursued a career practicing law, not in the disability space, but starting over 4 decades ago, I decided that I wanted to use my advocacy training for a passion that mattered to me outside my day job, and that was doing disability rights advocacy. So that involved such things as back in 1980 to 82, I was one of the people who advocated to get disability included in the Charter of Rights and in the Ontario Human Rights Code. And I learned early on about cross-disability organizing when I was one of many working together on those goals. I got into it because the cause matters to me, and because I'm fortunate enough to have the training to have the skills to be a lawyer. And not that I serve as lawyer for the cause. I don't. I'm an individual and I'm a private individual, but still, the training in doing persuasion is where I live. So it was trying to persuade people on something that really mattered. And one of the things I learned, Brad, early on was I as a blind person, learned initially about the barriers facing blind people. But I quickly learned that while deaf people face different barriers and people with intellectual disabilities face different barriers, and people with autism face different barriers, we actually all face the same barriers. The barrier we face is that we live in a world that's designed and operated largely for people without disabilities. We're kind of an afterthought, and we face, I mean, the manifestation of the barriers may be different, but the experience is the same. And so I learned that whichever barrier we're tackling, we need to tackle them all together.
That's great. Now, you mentioned, and I'm really curious about this, sitting here in 2024, thinking back to when Canada developed the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and repatriated the Constitution. You were involved in, disability was not included in the original drafts of the Charter of Rights, and it's hard to believe, 40 years plus since then that was even was it an oversight? Was it just not thought of, or have times changed that much?
Well, we've been trying to figure that out. In fact, I've got a memoir coming out where I talk about the history of the fight to get that we all mounted to get disability into the charter. And we were trying to figure out why we were left out. It was clearly someone decided it. And the only right from, over Parliament debated the charter from 1980 to 1982 when it was passed. And there was only one right added to it during that debate that wasn't in there in the first place, and that was equality for people with disabilities. It's one of those rare examples that recurs in the disability rights movement, I think, as much or more than in any other rights movement, where we got left out and then we kind of organized and fought and we elbowed our way in. The same with getting in the Ontario Human Rights Code, same with getting the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act passed, same with getting the Accessible Canada Act passed. These are grassroots, bottoms up wins, not top down rights just handed to us by politicians.
That's great. You talk a lot. You talk, and I've experienced you this way, where advocacy for you is a very personal endeavor, but it also is important to involve people at the grassroots who are in it not as in paid positions, or you've never accepted payment for any of the advocacy work that you've done, but you're pulling groups together around a common cause to influence policy. Can you talk about that experience versus some of the other approaches that advocacy can take?
Sure. Let me tell you this. First, I believe everyone is totally entitled to and should be involved in disability advocacy. There are those of us who already have our disabilities, but there are lots of people who don't yet have a disability, but they're bound to get one eventually, because disability comes to everybody as we age. So I don't take the position that only people with disabilities can fight for this cause, because this is everybody's cause. We are the minority of everyone. Well, then, how do we get everybody active? Well, to me, some people know of me, if they know of me at all, because they may have seen quotes of me in the media or something, because the media have asked me to comment on a number of stories, or I and my coalition have been involved in taking stories to the media. But the vast majority of our success doesn't come from loudmouths like me. The vast majority comes from individuals with disabilities, family members of individuals with disabilities, who take on the individual challenges of trying to persuade a school to provide an accommodation they're not providing, trying to provide a landlord to provide housing opportunity, trying to get government to provide something that they're not but should. And it's the work of all of us together that leads to victory. So what that leads me to want to do is to help empower people. So let me give you an example. We'll talk about education.
Yeah.
We have in Ontario-funded schools, there are 2 million students. At least 1/3 of a million of them are students with disabilities. And I mean any kind of disabilities: physical, intellectual, mental health, learning, or combination, sensory disabilities. Well, every one of their families, one way or another, has to advocate for their child's needs, because the school system is primarily designed to serve students without disabilities. We're an afterthought. And too often we're kind of an underclass. They come up with fancy names like exceptionalities. We don't have exceptionalities. We have disabilities. Okay, that's what they are. And it's not just a word. my blindness doesn't make me exceptional. I should be treated on a footing of equality, whether I'm blind or I'm sighted. I shouldn't be treated like I'm exceptional, like I'm different or abnormal. The same for all kids with disabilities. So what do we do about it? Well, I learned enough from doing advocacy myself and from the experience of others. And so I recorded a video, and I'm going to provide you with a link that you can share. And it's a video with tips for parents of students with disabilities on how to advocate for your child at school. What do I do? Who do I go to? You know, what can I do? How do I figure out what's going on? I try to provide really practical tips on what to do and how to do it. As well, you'll hear me mention that there's, under our anti-discrimination law, the Ontario Human Rights Code, school boards have a duty to accommodate students with disabilities. Well, you may have heard of that, but what on earth does it mean? Well, I recorded a video that's just an introduction for lay people of what the duty to accommodate people with disabilities means, not only in schools, but elsewhere, in jobs and whatever. So I'll provide you with those links, and I'm hoping those two tools will help individuals with disabilities and family members get some ideas of what they can ask for and how to push for it.
That's great. We've one of the previous chats that we had as part of these webinars was interviewing a parent, Laura Parsonson, talking about the experience with her daughter who was born with a disability, and how right from the first moments in the hospital, how different her journey was and how much of a struggle it was at times. For her to make sure that Emily was included in daycare centers, in community activities, and in school. That it's a struggle. And you talk about the rights that parents have, but you also point out that it can be a struggle for people to have those rights realized. The Special Education Advisory Committee is something that's a requirement of school boards and has been around for quite a long time. Can you talk about your work with the Special Education Advisory Committee and how that would relate to parents who are starting off on this journey with raising a child with a disability, or those who might be further along in their education in high school or leaving high school going into college? Long-winded question, but maybe start off with the SEAC and the role that you see that
so
playing.
it's Special Education Advisory Committee, or SEAC. I've been a member of this body for the Toronto District School Board since 2015. I was the chair for a couple of years back in 2016, 2017, and I'm now chair again for a year. These are all volunteers on this committee. They're appointed by the school board. TDSB is Canada's largest school board. We have 250,000 students. We have tens of thousands of students with disabilities. I think we may have more students with disabilities than some school boards have students in total. That's how big we are. And so what does this committee do? We are appointed under provincial law to give advice to the school board of what they need to do to better serve the needs of students with special education needs. Now, there's a few things I got to tell you right up front. We don't have the power to do anything except give advice. We don't have a right to be listened to, and certainly the school board doesn't have to listen to us. But our job is to try to give the best advice we can, and in my role as chair, to try to focus our attention on the issues that are the most important and to on the ones that will engage the interests of the diverse individuals and groups represented at the table. What we don't do, and some people don't understand this, we don't argue individual cases. So sometimes a parent who's having a battle with the school board will copy all of us on their child's case when they're writing and complaining. People are, of course, free to email us whatever they want, but we don't sit and assess individual cases and tell the school board what to do. We can't. We don't have the resources. We don't have the mandate. And frankly, we're all volunteers. So what does that mean? Well, school boards have to have a SEAC, but the question is, when can you have an impact, and can you have an impact?
Right.
It's not easy because school board senior officials who come to talk to us are, I believe, well-meaning but overloaded. And their role is to manage the system as it is, and our role is to try to make it better. There are times that we have had an impact. I'm going to give you an illustration. Back in 2017, when I was chair last time, we had a lawyer from the Arch Disability Law Center come and speak to us about whatever he wanted, about issues that they hear about from parents. And if families have an issue with their school board and they can't get any progress, sometimes they have to resort to talking to legal professionals. And Arch is a community legal aid clinic. They're fantastic. Well, he came in and told us that there was a recurring problem at school boards around Ontario, not just Toronto, which is that school principals have the power to refuse to admit a student to school for all or part of the day. So you got to imagine the family wants the child to go to school, the child wants to go to school, but the principal says either you can't come at all, can't come for part of the day. Now, you should immediately think, wait a minute, are we talking about discipline? Like they're being suspended? No, this is not discipline. And then you might think, well, aren't we all supposed to have a right to an education? Yes, you do. But this seems to be a hole in that right, and a very serious one. So we went to the school, and disproportionately, this power has been used on some families of students with disabilities. Like, for example, Arch told us sometimes a school might call a parent and say, your child's education assistant is sick today. We can't accommodate your child. Please pick your child up. Well, that's wrong. If the EA is away, the school board's job is to cover them. That's why we have supply lists.
Yeah.
Right. And so we then turned back in 2017 to the school board and said, well, what's your policy on when you'll do this and when you won't? Well, they didn't have one. Well, we pushed for months and had long conversations, and they eventually developed one. And it was a real improvement. Now there's questions now about how many of their staff 7 years later know it or follow it. So we're still hearing from our members that too often this is happening, these exclusions from school. So I can tell you under my chair role, I am going to be putting this on the agenda and focusing attention. Now, again, we can't force the board to do anything, but we can certainly try to use our advocacy to try to put pressure and make recommendations to the trustees and so on. Now, you can follow our meetings. They may be boring for some people, but if you go to the TDSB website and you look up the Special Education Advisory Committee, our meetings the dates are posted in advance, our agendas and so on, and they're streamed live on YouTube. So they're physically open to the public now.
That's great to know.
And so on, but still, and if a community like, for example, Community Living Toronto has a representative on our CIAC, Tracy Regan, she's fantastic as an advocate, and also she's an absolutely delightfully lovely person. Now, your community can, through your representative, your organization, can come to me as the chair and say, hey, here's a recurring issue. Can we get that on the agenda? And my job, I'm kind of an air traffic controller. What I do, because I get these requests, is try to figure out, okay, you got a problem? Let's see if we can work it out with staff without having to deal with it at a meeting. If we can work it out with the board, that's great. If not, then it's my job to try to make sure people get airtime. So that's what we do. So we don't deal with individual cases, but we're trying to look for areas where we can make improvements. I'll tell you a second one that I can tell you I'm quite committed to work on, and I think that my colleagues on the committee are too. Students with disabilities are entitled to what's called an individual education plan. That's the school board coming up with a written document that says, here's what your additional learning needs are, here's what we're prepared to do for you. Well, under the provincial regulations, the school board's supposed to consult with the family on what should be in that plan. And that's great. But the way the board, most boards do this, as far as I'm concerned, maybe all, is they just send a letter home. we're going to do an individual education plan, tell us what your child's needs are, and tell us what their strengths are, or whatever, and we'd be happy to talk to you. But what they don't do is offer to the family, why don't you come in if you'd like, and we could have a meeting, an IEP meeting with the teacher and the principal and the school board professionals, and you can bring your professionals if you have anybody with her and anybody you want, and let's talk together about what should be in the individual education plan. Now, parents like me who know that we can ask, and I would hope most, if not all the time, we get the meeting. And I can tell you from personal experience, it's a really helpful process. But there are lots of parents who don't know to ask. Now, any watching this, my advice to you, my recommendation, my friendly suggestion, one parent to the next, if you try to ask an IEP, or they may be developing one, ask your principal, say, I'd like to come in for an IEP meeting. You can do it in person, you can do it on Zoom. We'd like to work out together what should be in that document.
Yeah, the IEP is a really great tool that allows families to sort of track the accommodations that have been made through the duration of a student's time in school, and also can be used as a good tool for the student themselves or for parents as they go into the next year of school or move from primary school into high school. But you're right, it's a tool, but it's only as good as the plan that went in, the way effort that went into development, and the degree to which it is accommodated and used for accommodation in the classroom.
And so here's the problem. The board doesn't tell families who may not know any better that they can ask for an IEP meeting in order to collaborate on what's in the IEP. And if parents don't know to ask, they're less likely, they're probably not going to ask. So I'm going to be proposing, we have already recommended to the board, and I want to ramp up the pressure on this, that the board should notify all families in writing that they can ask for an IEP meeting. Now, why on earth would the board say no? But that's an illustration of one of the issues that at least I'm hoping we can put on the agenda.
That's great. You mentioned Tracy O'Regan, who's a longtime staff person at Community Living Toronto, and is on both the Toronto District School Board and the Catholic School Board as an SCAC advisor. So if there's anybody watching, or if in your networks people are aware of issues or themes that are recurring, please reach out to Tracy, or you can do that through our website, and she can collect those themes and start bringing them forward as she's done for years. I tend to agree, David, that I think so much of the education system, it's not that people are poorly intent. There's not bad intention or malintent behind people's sort of some of the misses that happen, but people are overwhelmed. We've seen a theme as well at times especially with the students on the autism spectrum, or that may have challenges making it through a whole day, where they follow the spirit of the law, but not or the letter of the law, but not the spirit. So somebody might be able to come for an hour or an hour and a half in the morning and then have to go back home. And it's a way of saying, yes, they're engaged in school, but they're really not receiving an education. And there's a lot of burden on families to cover off that time of day and not giving people their full right to education.
The problem is this: the problem roots in there are two root problems in the system. One is that, as I said earlier, the system is designed essentially to serve students without disabilities, which they used to actually call normal students, believe it or not, offensive as that sounds. So students who aren't in that bandwidth, they call exceptional pupils. And that doesn't mean exceptional like Brad Saunders is an exceptional guy, even though you are an exceptional guy. But it means they're weird, they're not normal. And then they don't call them disabilities, they call them exceptionalities. So that's already bad enough. Could you imagine a workplace that said we had white employees and then we had exceptional employees? It's like, that's racist, and it would be. Why should people with disabilities be viewed any differently? So that's the first problem. The second problem is that the provincial government's outdated definition of exceptional pupils does not include all the disabilities that our human rights code guarantees equality to.
Oh,
So
wow, I didn't realize that.
we've gotten complaints, for example, that ADHD isn't covered. Now, some school boards will accommodate students with ADHD anyway. Others will say, well, that's not an exceptionality, that's not identified, that's not, and so on. And different parents get different experiences. It's ridiculous because there's a duty to accommodate all students with disabilities, regardless of what their disability is. So it's a
Great point.
and the final problem is when you got a school board that's a system, and this isn't just Toronto, this is province wide, which is why we've taken the message to the province that's operating under these handcuffs that make it harder for teachers and principals to serve all learners. It makes things worse. So we got to take off the handcuffs. So how do you do that? Well, I can tell you the coalition I lead, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance, we've been pushing since 2009 for the provincial government to pass a new regulation to tear down the recurring barriers that impede students with disabilities in our school system. So how are we doing? Well, we've never gotten that regulation, but we got the government to agree 8 years ago to develop the regulation. We got the government to appoint an expert committee to recommend what it should include. I had the privilege and the honor of being on that committee. It was made equally up of disability sector experts and education sector experts. Had a long name, the Kindergarten to Grade 12 Education Standards Development Committee. We rendered a comprehensive report over 2 years ago. And unfortunately, the provincial government has done nothing to enact the regulation that we recommended.
That's unfortunate, but it does give you something to focus on during your term as SEAC.
Oh, absolutely.
And your advocacy work. We'll have to leave it there, David. I know we could chat for another half an hour or so, but thanks for taking the time this afternoon. Thanks for your leadership and advocacy, and thanks for agreeing to come on as the SEAC chair again. Really look forward to supporting you in that role and having a productive term for you in that chair role.
Thanks very much. And let me just make a quick plug. If anybody watching would like to learn more about this advocacy work, you can sign up to get email updates from the AODA Alliance. I'll give you the link, but I'm going to say it too. You just go to www.aodaalliance.org, aodaalliance.org. Right on the homepage, that you click on the sign up link, put in your email address, and you'll get our updates. It'll give you lots of tips on how to help.
Perfect. I'm on the list. It's well worth the inbox notifications that come with it. Thanks for your time, David. We'll chat again soon. Thank you.
Thanks so much for including me.
The disability community is fortunate to have David as an advocate, and we have all benefited from his efforts. David's memoir has been released and is available at no charge online. If you Google his name, a link will come up to download a copy that you can read. It makes for a fascinating few days of diving into David's life and advocacy. David's also prolific on social media, and I'd really encourage you to follow him. Thanks for joining us on Community Chats, Community Living Toronto's conversations, sharing interesting and relevant topics. Please like, share, and give us your feedback. We love hearing from you. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.
Don't forget to join us next time as we unpack the power of community through collaborative initiatives and shared experiences. Available on Buzzsprout, Spotify, Audible, and YouTube. Follow us on social media at CL Toronto. Let's chat, share, and spread those good vibes together. We hope these discussions will inspire you and give new ideas to add your voice to our mission of making our communities and neighborhoods inclusive and welcoming.